So when you think of a man in a hat riding a horse, you'd usually think of a bravely awesome Lone Ranger cowboy seen in classic western film. But what if I told you some of those characteristics also go to the Guatemalan boogeyman, also known as El Sombrerón. Often depicted as a man in a large black hat covering his face, accompanied by sometimes a horse, sometimes a couple of mules, and even dogs. Dang, this guy likes his animals. However, that's the only likable feature about this guy. He's a creep, and when I say a creep, I mean the guy's hobby is braiding random people's hair. Now let me backtrack a bit. Compared to other Latin American myths like La Llorona or El Cucuy, El Sombrerón isn't as widely known, at least outside of Guatemala, where his myth is most popular. I'm guessing that like a lot of Latin American folklore, the tale of El Sombrerón was mostly passed down orally, meaning that it was pretty difficult to find much information about him. However, that didn't stop me from trying to find out more about this strange man, and what impact he had culturally. I was able to find several stories to show us what this mysterious guy does, and why he's so creepy. Most of these stories are pretty similar, and usually start off with a young girl on a balcony or windowsill, brushing her long hair and staring out at the full moon for some reason. That's when our friend Mr. Creep comes trotting by and starts to admire these girls. For this story, let's just refer to this one victim as Maria, cause why not? He then tied up his mules and pulls out his guitar, sometimes depicted as silver, and serenades her. The sound of his singing and the guitar are so entrancing to Maria that she could hardly resist climbing down to be with him. In one of the stories, the parents of Maria eventually find her outside and quickly pull her back inside, only to find that her hair had been braided, much like the hair of El Sombrerón horse. Nope, not creepy at all. This was a sign that she had been cursed to never marry. Little did they know that that wasn't going to be the last time she ever saw the man. Every day from then on, when she would try to sleep, she would be kept awake by El Sombrerón songs outside her window, forcing her to become sleep deprived. Every time she tried to eat, she would find dirt and rocks contaminating her food, forcing her to go hungry. No matter what, El Sombrerón wouldn't go away. In fact, after a while, Maria would find a man in her house continuing to serenade her. This would go on and on every day, and she'd grow more and more tired and hungry, unable to sleep, unable to eat, or even exist without the looming presence of El Sombrerón. And unfortunately, many of his victims are haunted by him for so long that they eventually go mad with sleep deprivation and die of starvation. With El Sombrerón returning to the roads on his horse with his dogs and mules by his side until he finds his next victim. But not before attending the funeral of his last one, crying. However, it doesn't have to end that way, as Maria's parents cut her hair and take it to the local church to put holy water on it. Only then will El Sombrerón finally leave Maria alone. In other versions of the story, instead of holy water, you will need to find a stick straight from Jesus' cross. How do you come across this? I don't know, don't ask me. That's not all the stories though. There is one more, which is actually a movie called El Sombrerón. What else would it be called? It was one of the first movies filmed in Guatemala in 1950, and oh yeah, spoilers by the way, if you care about that kind of stuff for 70-year-old black and white movies. This movie starts off about a young woman named Rosalia, whose father wants her to get married. However, she refuses, saying that all men are the same. Oh yeah, and her cousin is a little bit too grabby, so let's just not talk about that and move on. The father then complains about his daughter's strong independence to the local priest, who for some reason recounts the time he met El Sombrerón one random night and decided to invite him inside the church. The guy next to him rightfully being not okay with this idea. El Sombrerón starts to talk about himself, and we get another flashback. Wow, what is this, Inception? After several musical scenes, this other man gets a little bit too grabby, and when the woman doesn't like it, he proceeds to pull out a knife. A knife! He's tied up to be punished, when someone cuts him loose. After a while, we then see that El Sombrerón puts on his signature attire and murders the woman, for some reason. The knife swinger from earlier proceeds to follow the runaway murderer on a pretty cool horse chase scene, and they wrestle for a bit until the knife swinger finally kills him. So that begs the question, isn't this El Sombrerón flashback? How is he talking to the priest about this? And that is a good question, which also confused me a little bit. Until we see that a mob bursts into the church with the guy from earlier pointing out El Sombrerón saying, that's him, that's El Sombrerón, with everyone else in the room not believing him, except for the priest. You're starting to see where this is all going? El Sombrerón then questions his very existence as he fades away. Leaving behind his hat, which starts to scurry around on the floor, scaring the heck out of everyone in the room. Flash forward to Rosalia's father talking to the priest from earlier, and Rosalia eavesdropping on them. And then someone pops up with a large hat, blah blah blah. The creepy cousin learns his lesson happily ever after, kiss scene in the end of the movie. The movie is actually pretty interesting, considering that it's really one of the few stories that I could find about him. El Sombrerón, that is. So what significance do these stories have in Guatemalan and Latin American culture? Well, for starters, it's a tale that in some versions, like the one with the cross or holy water, shows how much religion has an influence on Latin America ever since the arrival of the Spanish in a region that for the most part was very polytheistic for hundreds if not thousands of years. Even the movie has many strong influence to religion, as do other Latin American tales like La Llorona not being able to go to heaven, or the Cadejo being the physical manifestation of the devil himself. It also shows the values people had at the time, as the parents in these stories often want their daughters to get married, as it was seen as the proper thing to do, and something that has to be done. This is seen in other cultures all over the world and throughout history, for various reasons, from tradition to economical reasons, sometimes resulting in arranged marriages too, which surprisingly still happens a lot. But whether they actually work or last for a long time is a totally different topic. However, many families like the ones we see in the El Sombrerón movie seem to believe that this was the only option. However, they don't particularly like the men that these women quote-unquote fall in love with, as he's not what they envision, which in this case is totally justified. I already explained how El Sombrerón is a creep, right? However, the women in this movie don't seem to be very interested in these men at all, which is an interesting spin on the tale. I find it interesting that in all these different stories, the only thing that's really consistent is that El Sombrerón and his big cat is creeping up on all these random women, and the presence of religion, as every story is about a completely different set of characters, as El Sombrerón is constantly wandering around, wreaking havoc on poor unsuspecting families, all across Guatemala. And most importantly, like El Cucuy and La Llorona, El Sombrerón is a cautionary tale. This one is specifically to young women, telling them to be cautious of the men that they meet, as they may not have the best of intentions. However, I also believe that even if it wasn't originally intended, these stories can also be a cautionary tale to parents, even if it wasn't intended to at first, who are all set on their daughters getting married as soon as they can, just because all the cool kids are doing it. I find it interesting just how similar Latin American folktales are, with just the right amount of horror mixed with the caution of the dangers of the world, with a sprinkle of religion. After researching this, I realized just how cool this will all be as a modern day horror film. I mean, Latin America has so many creepy and downright terrifying monsters that horror movies could play around with this kind of stuff, just like that one Llorona movie that they made. And I don't even like horror movies. I'm such a baby when it comes to anything scary. I mean, come on, I already deal with anxiety on a daily basis. I don't need to pay to experience it on a screen. Sorry, I just had to rant there for a second. Now, where was I? If there's anyone watching this who makes horror movies, make one about El Sombrerón. It's been 70 years and we're overdue for new content. Just think about it.